Okay, everybody, welcome into the P2W Fantasy YouTube channel. My name is Colin McTamany, and I'm continuing on with the series here where I interview experts, analysts, pretty much anyone that breaks down specific teams from around the NFL. And today we are going to be talking the Indianapolis Colts. I'm joined by Jake Arthur. As you can see, his Twitter handle there, at Jake Arthur NFL. Jake, let's start right off here. Who are you? How long you been covering the Colts? Where can people find your stuff? Why don't you tell everyone a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, thanks for having me. So I am Jake Arthur. I'm the deputy editor over at horseshoehuddle.com. We cover everything about the Colts head to toe, basically. I'm also one half of the Locked On Colts podcast team with my partner, Zach Hicks, and I. So pretty much cranking out Colts content all the time. The podcast is every day, Monday through Friday. So if you pay any attention to anything Colts, you've probably heard it before. I am here from Indy, been here pretty much all of my 33 years, but I've been covering them for, I think this is my 11th season now. So I've seen some stuff with this team by now.
Yeah, yes, you have indeed. And I think the best way to start this is kind of talk about what's happened really since Andrew Luck. Um, Obviously, we are a fantasy football channel, and I remember specifically drafting with my home league. We had just wrapped up our draft, and our phones blew up. Andrew Luck has announced his retirement, and I remember the guy that drafted Andrew Luck was
Yeah.
not very happy. Was that a shock just as much to people that aren't Colts fans as it was to you?
Yeah, I was in a similar boat from a fantasy perspective. My home league we had picked our keepers like the deadline was that week, and I had kept Andrew Luck because I had him way down the list, and then the news broke like the next day. So, no, it was very unexpected. You always knew Andrew could do anything outside of football, so he wasn't a guy that needed football, and he probably wasn't going to hang around 15, 20 years. But as for the timing of it, yeah, it was pretty surprising. By that point, all of us that covered the team knew that whatever that lower leg injury was, it was probably more serious than what was being let on. He probably could have kept playing through it, but he wasn't just going to keep doing that thing where he was playing through injury and making things worse into where his life was just 24/7 rehab from an injury, basically. So it was really surprising at the moment. Looking at it in hindsight, probably not so much because you get where he was coming from. But no, I mean, I was there in the stadium in the press box that night, there in the locker room, there in the media room when he was announcing
iconic
his
interview. Yeah, I mean,
yeah, I was gonna say I still got pictures on my phone from that night. So it was a surreal night. It's one I'll never forget. But no, it's tough. I think the Colts are finally ready to move on from that one after 4 or 5 years, though.
Yeah, so I mean that's a great segue. I mean, since his last start in 2018, which seems like forever ago, obviously since the year 2020, all the craziest that year, time is a little bit of it seems all jumbled together. But Andrew Luck's last start, 2018, 7 different quarterbacks over 4 seasons. Obviously, we had Jacoby Brissett that year, one game of Brian Hoyer, a full season of Phillip Rivers. That seems like a lifetime ago. A full season of Carson Wentz, which is a very rare thing. And then last year, of course, we had Matt Ryan, Sam Ehlinger, and Nick Foles. But, of course, they earned the 4th overall pick, and they drafted Anthony Richardson. That obviously seemed like a very likely move. We just talked about the Andrew Luck retirement. I just went over, the last 4 seasons of quarterback carousel there. But I want to draw your attention to a tweet from Jim Irsay from April 16th. For the 2023 draft, we have many options. With the 4th overall pick, he said that they can move up, they can move down. They feel very fired up, or maybe not take a QB. So when did you feel that Anthony Richardson was the pick, or were you just as surprised again on draft night to hear his name selected?
I always thought he was probably one of the 2 most likely picks. It just depended on who was going to be there because up until probably the pro days, Bryce Young, we didn't know where he was going to go. Like,
Right.
at that time still, it seemed like CJ Stroud was probably going to be the first pick to the Panthers. It wasn't until like right after the pro day circuits when the order kind of started to go in. But I'm gonna say that I felt really confident about it, probably starting in April,
Oh,
about the whole
wow.
month of April at Locked On Colts and Horseshoe Huddle. We explored all options, but we were really hammering home that we thought it would be Richardson, just because the type of prospect he is, just screamed Chris Ballard. And also, the Colts brought in Shane Steichen, who just maximized a similar style quarterback in Jalen Hurts to an MVP caliber season. So, Chris Ballard, who is always going to bet on traits, the player might be inexperienced or raw, but if they have athletic abilities where they can jump out of the gym, Ballard's going to be interested. And it just so happens that between his mix of size and athleticism, we've never seen a more intriguing quarterback prospect than Richardson. So that was a huge check mark for the Colts. And then Steichen has already in his young career kind of developed a reputation for getting the most out of these guys, no matter how, how much how much room they have to hit their ceiling. So the marriage just seemed really likely. The last couple weeks before the draft, there was so much smoke about Will Levis, and honestly, that was one thing that made me think it was never going to be Levis. It's like that stuff doesn't leak out of that room about the draft. Like you can get stuff you can break news about free agents or contract extensions, things like that, but it's very hard to get intel from the Colts draft room about specifically the draft. And the fact that every national guy out there had something about the Colts love Will Levis, that just stunk to me. It did not seem right. And to me, it meant Anthony Richardson was almost assuredly the guy that was there. The only caveat to me was going to be if CJ Stroud potentially was there at 4. I thought he made a ton of sense. But otherwise, Richardson just made all the sense in the world.
Yeah, you talked about his traits. Obviously, Richardson exploded at the combine. 4.43 40-yard dash speed, 40.5-inch vertical, quarterback record all time at the combine, a 10-foot 9-inch broad jump, also a quarterback record. And you mentioned some other adjectives that describe Richardson. We've heard them before: raw, unpolished, a project, inexperienced. Now, he only had 393 pass attempts at college and really only one full season as the sure thing starter. Do you expect him, as of now on May 19th, as we're recording this, to be the week 1 starter for the Indianapolis Colts?
I think that's their goal. They're not going to force it, and it's why they got a guy like Gardner Minshew, who they're confident they could start a handful of games if they needed to. Plus, he's very familiar with Shane Steichen. He's just been with him for the last couple of years. So I think they're going to try and get Richardson ready for week 1. I think he's further along than a lot of people think, and the Colts acknowledge that as well. Like he's not blowing people away by any means yet, because like it just started. The rookies just got into it with the vets this week. But everyone is very impressed by like his mental acumen and everything. He's impressing Gardner Minshew and Jim Bob Cooter, the offensive coordinator, Shane Steichen. They've all talked very positively about him, obviously about what he can do on the field, but what he's doing in the meeting rooms as well. Like he's been very receptive to feedback. He's willing to admit when he's wrong. He's asking good questions, things like that. So he's doing all the right things so far. They're not going to force it if they don't think he's quite ready. But the very common belief in the building is that you learn and develop by playing. So I think it's the most likely scenario that he is the starter week 1. But even if he's not, I'm almost certain that they're going to have a package of plays for him. Because again, it goes back to you learn by playing. And maybe they don't want him playing 65, 70 snaps a game, but that doesn't mean they don't want him getting live game reps. So I think regardless if he's the starter week 1, he'll be out there in some capacity.
Yeah, I think some people, especially in the fantasy football community, are wondering, can they rely on him for a full season, or is he even worth drafting if he does start by, say, October? So it's interesting you say that there could be a package for him. Obviously, a package isn't really enough to start him in fantasy, but it could lead to bigger things. His last season at the University of Florida, 103 rushing attempts, 654 yards, and 9 rushing touchdowns in just 12 games. We know what he brings to the table as far as running goes. And obviously, you mentioned before Jalen Hurts and Shane Steichen with the Eagles maximized Jalen Hurts, especially as a passer, but allowed him to run too. Do you expect that to be the same thing for Anthony Richardson as well with the Colts? They'll let him run if, the play breaks down or, they have designed runs for him?
Yeah, I think it'll be somewhat similar to what we've seen bringing Jalen Hurts up to speed earlier in his career. His ability to run is what they're probably going to be able to rely on to keep him on the field. It's the ultimate X factor. And plus they have Jonathan Taylor there as well, who is there's no better best friend for a rookie quarterback who can run than having a guy like that to run the RPOs and everything with you.
Right.
But no, they're going to let him run for sure. I've already predicted, the Colts single season franchise record for rushing touchdowns for a quarterback is only 5. I am pretty sure he's gonna break it this year.
That's music to fantasy managers' ears. I mean,
Oh yeah,
you
because I mean,
figure he runs 100 times and scores over 5 touchdowns.
yeah,
He's going to be a quarterback one, a starter for fantasy football. So that's great news.
exactly. I mean, you draft mobile quarterbacks with the hopes that their rushing ability gives you, it gives you a great floor every week from a
Yep.
fantasy perspective, and I think that'll be the case when he becomes the starter. Because I mean, you just don't know how many plays he'll play before he becomes the starter. But yeah,
So depending on league size, maybe you do draft Anthony Richardson in the middle
hmm
rounds and grab someone a little bit safer later on to start your first couple games. Could be a good
yeah,
strategy. But obviously, like you just said, though, we have a mobile quarterback here that can take away, obviously, attempts from the running back. So that brings us to Jonathan Taylor. This is a guy that's averaged nearly 18 rushing attempts per game. 2021, he obviously had a career best year, was the RB1 in fantasy football, nearly 20 rushing attempts per game. What does Richardson's mobility do for Jonathan Taylor, who's also in a contract year? Do you think there's maybe more check down passes? What can we expect from Taylor in the Shane Steichen offense?
I think as long as he stays healthy, everything is going to look a lot better for Taylor. I think it's going to look a lot more like 2021 than it did 2022. They've got the offensive line that they had to in the second half of last year, where they finally figured things out. That's probably going to be the group that starts this next season. So they probably feel fairly confident in their offensive line this time around. Taylor should be healthy now. He got the ankle cleaned up, and I think we've talked to him a couple times this offseason, and there doesn't seem to be any concern there. So I honestly, I think Taylor is going to bounce back. I think this running style or the scheme is going to be a lot more similar, again, like I said, to 2021. You had Carson Wentz, who you probably don't call him a mobile quarterback, but he did move around quite a
He could
bit.
run, yeah.
The RPO game was a viable option. It was all on the table when you had Carson Wentz out there. And then you had a statue and Matt Ryan last year. So very different styles. But being able to get, have the quarterback go out there and get Taylor out in space with lighter boxes, I think that's going to be a huge deal. And again, the threat of Anthony Richardson, too, is going to take away attention from Taylor. So I think in general, I would find it very hard to believe that a healthy Jonathan Taylor doesn't bounce back for another Pro Bowl caliber year.
Yeah, I mean, I think right now, again, we're recording this May 19th. Obviously, most people fantasy drafts aren't until probably August, late August,
Mhm.
after the preseason commences. I think some people have moved Taylor down because of just one unhealthy season last year, which doesn't really seem right to me. Obviously, you have guys like Bijan Robinson, a new exciting rookie. You have Christian McCaffrey, who's been doing it for years. You have Austin Eckler, who's still in LA as of now, can catch passes that are probably going to go ahead of him. So maybe people with a mid first round pick are going to get a value, as you're saying, with Jonathan Taylor. If for some reason, obviously the running back position is a very volatile position. Injuries do happen. There's a ton of contact. If we were to see him miss time of any sort next year, what do we make of this, backfield behind him? We have Zach Moss, we have Deion Jackson, who had some good games last year, and then they drafted rookie Evan Hull. Who do you expect to step up in the event, or maybe alongside of Jonathan Taylor, in the event that he's not on the field?
So last season when Taylor went on IR for good with the ankle injury and was out the last handful of games, it was Zach Moss who was carrying the load, and he actually looked really good. He was productive every week. So he kind of took over as the primary early down guy. Deion Jackson is a really good pass catching back.
Mm-hmm.
But Hull is kind of the X factor because he was arguably the best pass catching running back in the draft. And so far from what we've seen in rookie minicamp and everything, he catches everything.
Wow.
So that's the big question to me is it basically comes down to Jackson versus Hull. I think Moss is going to have a role regardless. He's probably the safest of the rest of the group because he's also the best pass protector, even including Jonathan Taylor. So he's going to be there. He's going to have a role. So he's the one I'd be most confident in. But both Jackson and Hull are very intriguing pass catching backs.
Yeah, I mean, I guess maybe for now, most of them are going to be waiver wire pickups, depending on league size, but that's definitely some good insight. Let's move on to the wide receivers because I feel like there's a confident three we can talk about as far as fantasy production for 2023, especially. But I do want to get your insight here as someone who's been covering the team for a couple years. We have Michael Pittman. He's also in a contract year, only one 1,000-yard season. He did miss a game last year. He was about 80 yards shy of hitting that mark again. So close to two 1,000-yard seasons. He's also had 5 quarterbacks throw his way in his 3 seasons so far. He has had 141 targets last year and 129 targets the year prior. Obviously, this time we have a new head coach, we have a new offensive coordinator, and we have a new quarterback. Do you expect him to remain the top target in this offense just based on what you've seen or what you've heard so far?
Yeah, I do. I don't think there's going to be any big dip for him, and I don't think there's going to be any huge increase. What I see for him is probably another 85 catches for around 1,000 yards and about 6 touchdowns. Like that's kind of been his career average for the most part. Those are generally safe numbers for him, and I don't see any reason why those would tank or skyrocket for any reason. I do think the guys around him are going to tick up a little bit. Alec Pierce, he's more confident now, more comfortable. Plus, he's easily their best downfield threat, and that's one of Anthony Richardson's strengths. So I think he'll see some increase. Jelani Woods, the tight end, I think he's going to see a pretty big role this year as well because I think the coaching staff is going to be sensible and actually use him. I know he was a rookie last year, but he was clearly one of their biggest threats.
I mean, 6'7", 253 pounds.
Yeah.
How do you not use him?
Right. You got a guy with Gronk size out there and really good athleticism. But Josh Downs is really intriguing. The rookie slot receiver. You hate to put a lot on a rookie, especially this early, like it's not even training camp yet. But there's a lot of legit buzz about him, and that includes coming from within the building. Reggie Wayne said he was the best receiver at the combine that he saw. He really liked him as a prospect. He's obviously not a big, imposing guy. He's like 5'9", 5'10", 175 pounds or something like that. But he's a really good technical receiver, and he brings things to the receiver room that they didn't have, and they know that. Mm-hmm. And so when you're looking at a guy who's going to win you his one-on-one matchup on 3rd and 6, 4th and 5, whatever, I think Josh Downs is going to be that guy they look for a lot. So I see a similar role for Pittman, coming back to your point, a similar role for Pittman, but I do think there are guys around him who are going to see more targets than, what maybe would have gone to Pittman previously.
So while things may have improved for Michael Pittman as far as a staff and obviously quarterback standpoint, you do feel that the other guys around him are going to elevate to a point that Pittman's kind of capped as far as the ceiling goes. Would that be correct?
Yeah, the only, because he's going to have another new quarterback this year. I mean, hopefully that's the long-term quarterback for him, but it's another new quarterback, and potentially too, because Gardner Minshew and Anthony Richardson could both play. But I think it's sensible for both of them to want to target him quite a bit. He's the most complete receiver of the bunch. He's got size, adequate speed. He can create yards after the catch. We saw with Carson Wentz that he can win matchups downfield, make contested catches. So he is their best, most complete receiver. So I think he'll still be treated as such.
Now, I know this is very early to be talking about this. We're about 10 months away from really needing to talk about this. But as far as these guys go that I mentioned, they're in a contract year. We got Jonathan Taylor and Michael Pittman. Would you expect them to bring both? One, who's more likely to come back, or what's your gut feeling on it right now? What do these guys need to do to get back here next year, just for those dynasty fantasy football managers out there?
Yeah, we actually tackled this subject earlier this week on Locked On Colts. So there's like 14 receivers right now that are making at least 20 million a year, I think. And you've got to think with Pittman's next deal, he's probably going to fall into that,
Yeah,
especially if he has another quality season. That's just the price
yeah,
of
he hits the 1,000 yard
leading.
mark, he's going to do it. Yeah,
Yeah, that's just the price of leading receivers now. About 35, 40 million guaranteed. Taylor, uh, Taylor is probably going to get at least 13 or 14 million per year, probably 40 million guaranteed, probably somewhere around what Christian McCaffrey and Alvin Kamara have done. I think it makes the most sense for the Colts to bring back Jonathan Taylor. It'd be great if they could bring back both, but I just think Taylor is a much bigger difference maker. Like I think if the offense gets really humming this year, it's going to be because of the combination of Richardson and Taylor. And if you take Taylor away, I just don't think it's going to be the same, because there are maybe only a handful of special running backs in the NFL, and I think Taylor is one of them. He did have a down season last year, but he was running on one leg for a good portion of that. And before that was running behind an offensive line that couldn't create any push whatsoever. So we've seen what he can do behind a good offensive line and with a quarterback that has any sort of mobility whatsoever. And so I just think you take Taylor away from that, and it's just not going to be the same. And that's coming from someone who's never really been a big proponent of pour all your resources into a running back.
right.
Because again, this is a team that's closer to rebuilding than they are competing
Winning
for
championships. Right.
And running backs, paying a big investment in that for me is towards more championship teams. But man, if you want to help out your young quarterback, Taylor is one of the rare exceptions to do it for.
Yeah, I think that gets lost sometimes with paying running backs is what is the point of it? You have a guy like Derrick Henry. The Tennessee Titans paid him. I think they paid him because he was the asset to win a championship. I mean, they were the
Yeah.
number one seed in the AFC a couple years ago, but maybe a guy like Taylor you pay to see and maximize what you can get out of Anthony Richardson. He's not so much the guy that's going to help you win, but you're going to get the most in the next 3-4 years out of Anthony Richardson to know if he's the guy.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's pretty much all we need to talk about as far as these offensive players go. I don't think we missed anyone too important here. Are there any other nuggets or anything we should be looking for from the 2023 Colts that you think will help out fantasy managers this year?
Yeah, so I kind of briefly mentioned Josh Downs and Jelani Woods. I think Woods is due for a big role this year. He already looked pretty good as a rookie last year. Josh Downs in PPR formats, especially dynasty leagues, that's a guy I would go grab early within those mid rounds of your rookie draft. Downs is just, I think he's got a really bright future with the Colts, and no one is making a secret about it.
Yeah, he led the ACC in receptions in 2021 with 101 receptions, and then he led the ACC last year as well in 2022, 94 receptions. I do foresee him hitting, a lot of slant routes, getting across the field, commanding attention as far as from Anthony Richardson across the field and working with Reggie Wayne. I mean, when I first started playing fantasy football in the early mid 2000s, Reggie Wayne, having him on your team as a slot receiver, he was a guy that was just awesome with Peyton Manning. So couldn't have a better coach, behind him there. Well, Jake, I appreciate you coming on here to the P2W Fantasy YouTube channel. Tell everyone again where they can find your stuff.
Yeah, of course. And thanks again for having me. On Twitter at Jake Arthur NFL, same with Facebook. Locked On Colts is the podcast, and horseshoehuddle.com is the website.
All right, everybody. We'll be checking out that stuff, and definitely go follow Jake on Twitter at Jake Arthur NFL. It's right there, right under him. Jake, thank you so much again for coming on here, and go Colts 2023.
Yeah, appreciate it. Thanks for having me.
All right, man. Take it easy.